Good morning, all. Welcome virtually to the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. My name is Madison Lipson, and I'm a research associate with the Wilson Center's Canada Institute. And today we have a really interesting program for you, organized together with the Wilson Center Global Europe program and with the support of the embassies of Canada and Latvia here in Washington. Before we begin, please take note of the box that appears on your screen below the video. If you are joining us live, you can submit questions for the panelists by entering them in that box, and we will try to get to all of your questions, although some questions may be combined by our moderator for efficiency purposes. Speaking of our moderator, it is my pleasure to turn over to you now, the Woodrow Wilson Center Global Europe Program Director, Robin Quinville.
Thank you, Maddie. I appreciate that. We are very excited by this discussion today, and because the Secretary General has just completed a transatlantic visit to both the US and to Canada, and we were happy to host NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg here at the Wilson Center last week. And for those of you who are listening, that is available still online. And one of the points that he emphasized during his discussion with us was NATO's incredible ability to transform itself over time and how the effect that that has had on keeping the alliance vibrant and strong. And it meets then the challenges of the moment as it has over its 75-year history, which we'll celebrate at the Washington Summit here in a couple of weeks. This transformation has meant a continual reassessment of threats. It has meant common planning, a common commitment to deterrence, and investment in the capabilities that we need. So we thought this was would be a great opportunity to kind of do a deep dive into one of the operations that's a key example of how NATO has that ability to change, and that is Canada's Operation REASSURANCE. This deployment as part of NATO's enhanced forward presence in Northern and Central Europe has been continuous since 2016, but we want to talk about how that is changing and that commitment. And so we are here to talk about that today with our guests from both Canada and from the Latvian embassy here in Washington, DC. So introductions, they all bring really long and detailed professional experience to this. So I'm condensing it. I hope nobody is offended. Here we go. Scott Miller is Canada's Associate Deputy Minister of Horizontal Policy in the Department of National Defence. And he brings to this job extensive experience in Canada's government, including focus on combating terrorist financing, work at the Treasury Board, experience directing communication security efforts, and also crafting strategic policy for Canada's Border Security Service Agency. Ambassador Selga, thank you so much for joining us. He has been Latvia's ambassador to Washington since 2019 and was held previous ambassadorships to China and many other countries, including Mongolia, Vietnam, Jordan, and the United Arab Emirates. He is an expert on security policy, and we are delighted to have him with us today. And also joining us from Canada is Major General Gregory Smith, Director General for International Security Policy at Canada's Department of National Defence. He brings to this job not only his work leading the Canadian Forces Intelligence Command, but also his in-depth knowledge of NATO, having served as the head of strategic planning at NATO HQ in Brussels, and previous experience leading multinational operations from his work in Iraq, where I also served as a diplomat. So with all of that, I welcome you all. And I thought what we'd do is I'd start by turning the floor over to Deputy Minister Miller, and then Ambassador Selga. When he finishes, I'm going to turn to you with our first question. So, Deputy Minister, the floor is yours.
Thanks, folks, and thank you so much, Robin. I think you just gave me a field promotion. I am an assistant deputy minister, and I just, in case my deputy minister watches this, I want to stay on the right side of my performance review. But
sorry about that.
It's all good.
And I do appreciate that. On the other hand, a field promotion is not actually a bad thing.
No, thanks so much. And you got the pronunciation of my name right, which is not a feat often performed with deafness. Hey, Maddie, nice to meet you. Ambassador, real pleasure to be on this panel with you today. I look forward to meeting you in person. Thanks, Chris, for your work that you do at the Canada Institute there. And yes, Greg is with me. I will try to bring some sizzle, but he will definitely bring the steak, as he definitely has a long professional experience in the Canadian military. I do have a bit of a gift of the gab, so I am moderating myself by actually using by preparing some marks to deliver at the front end to make sure use an economy of time and to leave space for the conversation, which I am really looking forward to engaging in. So with that, as we all look forward to the Leaders Summit next month and mark the historic 75th anniversary of the signing of the Washington Treaty, all allies are reflecting on their role within the alliance and how they can continue to contribute to its strength and unity. Canada is no different. We are and always have been committed to defending peace and security in Europe. Even more so now, as the peace in the Euro-Atlantic region faces ever-increasing threats. And as Russia's invasion of Ukraine will continue to drive NATO's work for the foreseeable future. However, the war has permitted NATO to reaffirm its raison d'etre and to show its resolve and its strategic importance and relevancy for the security of the world. And that collective defense that we exhibit remains the primary focus of the alliance. NATO's response to the war has illustrated the cohesion of the alliance in a time of crisis, the solidarity among its members, and the importance of its activities. As a founding member of the NATO alliance, Canada is steadfastly committed to the principles of collective defense and transatlantic security. It's a bit of a truism that NATO has been the cornerstone of Canada's defense policy since the end of the Cold War. There's a reason for that. On the one hand, our values and interests remain relatively consistent and constant. Freedom, democracy, rule of law, security for our citizens, and sovereignty for every nation, and an international order that is free and open and governed by an agreed set of rules. On the other hand, the security environment remains dangerous and increasingly so. The character of some of the threats we face has evolved, but the nature of the security challenges confronting us still calls for a cooperative approach to security, an alliance-based approach. Russia, for instance, is as much of a threat to Canada today as the Soviet Union was when we signed the Washington Treaty in 1949. At the end of the day, transatlantic security is inextricably linked to Canada's continued security and economic well-being. Trade is overwhelmingly focused on North America and Europe, and the transatlantic region is home to our closest allies. The transatlantic defense relationship, institutionalized in NATO, has made an enduring contribution to peace and prosperity in Europe and stability around the world. Because of that, Canada was a strong supporter of the alliance throughout the Cold War. That support continues today, and we will maintain our enduring commitment well into the future. Indeed, overall, NATO is the foundation of Canada's efforts to ensure peace and stability in Europe. Canada has participated in nearly every NATO mission and makes operational contributions under NATO's flag in many places around the world, across multiple domains, including land, sea, air, and cyberspace, and emergingly in space itself. Of course, our greatest contribution is in Latvia, where we lead the NATO battle group, as Robin mentioned, which we are currently upscaling to a brigade. This Canadian-led multinational battle group has been in Latvia since 2017 under the moniker Operation REASSURANCE. Canada took on the role of framework nation following the Warsaw Summit in 2016, where NATO leaders decided to strengthen the alliance's military posture in the East to deter Russian aggression. Since 2017, thousands of Canadian and allied soldiers have rotated through Latvia, and our battle group now includes 10 allied contributors in addition to Canada and Latvia. And we are pleased that soon that will go up to 12, as Denmark and Sweden are expected to join the brigade as well. With the new contributions of these allies, our multinational brigade will represent more than a third of NATO's alliance. Now, following Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022 and the decision at the Madrid summit to enhance NATO's presence in the East and Southeast, Canada and Latvia agreed bilaterally to establish a persistently deployed brigade. This represents a more than doubling in size of the Canadian and multinational persistent presence in Latvia. We are growing from around 1,500 Allied troops to 3,000. As I speak to you, much of the brigade headquarters has arrived and is on the way to being fully staffed in the very near future. In October, the battle group will leave the Latvian Mechanized Infantry Brigade and become part of the new multinational brigade. Also in November, the brigade will conduct its first field exercise. This means that in that month, we will surge to 4,000 Allied soldiers in Latvia for the exercise, and up to 2,200 of them will be Canadians. Obviously, this exercise represents a significant milestone for the brigade, and it will demonstrate to NATO that the brigade is operational. But it's not just people that we are pre-positioning into Latvia. Canada has committed $2.6 billion to this effort, and of this, $236 million is committed to being building semi-permanent and permanent structures across Latvia. We've committed $1 billion to procuring new capabilities, including air defense, anti-armor, counter-UAS, drones, all of which will be brought to the country. By 2026, Canada will complete full implementation of the persistently deployed capabilities. And in Canada, we will also have pre-positioned personnel, equipment, and some of the necessary stocks required to rapidly surge and deploy forces as necessary. Of course, recognizing the geographic distance between Canada and Latvia, we're committing many forces and enablers forward in Latvia itself, ready to respond to threats against NATO territory. You might be interested to know that today, Operation REASSURANCE is Canada's largest overseas deployment, and as you heard, is only growing. More specifically, Latvia is the Canadian Army's main line of effort. For emphasis, by 2026, Latvia will host more than 20% of the Canadian Army's vehicle fleet and a majority of its deployable personnel. Ultimately, the Canadian Armed Forces are in Latvia to deter and, if necessary, defend against Russian aggression. This benefits the security of NATO, Latvia, and by extension, Canada. But our troops also benefit immensely from their time in Latvia. And the same is true for the Allied soldiers who work with us. In Latvia, our soldiers have the unique opportunity to work and train alongside soldiers who represent a third of the alliance. Every day, they encounter challenges that require them to work across language and culture to find creative solutions. They gain insight on how to work with new equipment, and they experience how other allied militaries think, train, and fight. We hear all the time how valuable these experiences are for our soldiers, and we hear from other allied militaries who tell us that their soldiers are better and more experienced when they return from Latvia than when they entered. Yes, of course, there are challenges having so many flags under one battle group and soon to be brigade, but it's necessary to confront and work through these challenges. At its core, this is what NATO is all about: a united, interoperable force committed to defending the Euro-Atlantic region. It's far better to train and learn together and to overcome interoperability and communications challenges in time of peace than in time of crisis. And this is the ultimate value and experience of Latvia. Now, I'd like to just take a moment to express, with an eye on Ambassador Selga, Canada's appreciation to our gracious host nation, Latvia. The close collaboration between us and their unstinting enthusiasm has been key to our success thus far. Canada looks forward to continuing to work together and with allies to ensure that the troops, materiel, and infrastructure required for the brigade are in place. Latvia is also increasing the size and capabilities of its own armed forces, and it's investing in infrastructure to support this growth, as well as the growth of the incoming brigade. Canada greatly appreciates these efforts, especially the new Salija Training Center and the future brigade headquarters space at Sari. In closing, I want to affirm that Canada will remain and is a committed ally, both because we believe in the values that underpin NATO and because having a strong alliance is in our national and collective interest. We will be there as NATO continues to adapt and, as Robin said, transform continuously, as NATO welcomes new members and confronts both persistent and evolving threats. As we look toward the Washington Summit this summer, Canada will be there, committed and engaged. and ready for NATO's next 75 years. Again, I look forward to the discussion, so I'm going to leave it there to leave space for that. Thanks, Robin. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very, very much indeed. I appreciate that. I'd like to turn the floor over to Ambassador Selga for some thoughts on this, including, the impact that this has had in Latvia. Latvia is doing its own transformation and really looking at capabilities, including instituting conscription. So if you could talk to us a little bit about how this cooperation has been from the Latvian side.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Wilson Center and Canada Institute, for organizing this online event. And of course, I have to say, from sitting here in the United States, welcome Canada and Canadians to Latvia. So I hope that you have the same fantastic cooperation with all institutions. I mean, on Canada side, with my colleagues at the embassy here, I'm there in Ottawa. Of course, and I have particular pleasure to take this opportunity to the fact that Canada through NATO is deeply and for a very long time involved in defense cooperation with Latvia to make sure that eastern flank of NATO is not endangered by Russia or anybody else. Canada's presence in Latvia is a prime example of how NATO works. Latvia's security, of course, today we cannot, looking at security of Latvia today, we cannot be detached from history of creation of my country in 1918. Our independence has to be won. Then, as a consequence of World War II, my country was swallowed by Soviet Russia for 50 years. And finally, after gaining of independence in 1991, it was clear for us that we should not try to be neutral and that we have to seek NATO membership. As you all know, Latvia joined NATO 20 years ago in the largest enlargement wave in history of NATO. By qualifying to join NATO, 7 Central and Eastern European countries significantly contributed to both future security by ceasing to remain in a security gray zone and consolidation of democracy, human rights, and accountability governance in Europe. Currently, despite war of aggression of Russia against Ukraine, we in Latvia feel more secure than ever before in our history. That, of course, may sound paradoxical to most of you, but that feeling stems from our historical experience that we see today repeating in Ukraine. In an ever-changing international environment, which is with ongoing Russia's brutal and provoked war of aggression against Ukraine, strong and united NATO remains essential for transatlantic collective defense against all threats from all directions. These threats cannot be addressed by a single nation alone. It is essential to tackle them collectively by all 32 members. In current unpredictable security setting, we face 2 main goals. First, to deter and defend NATO's own territory against any potential aggressor. And second, to provide all necessary military and financial support to Ukraine in its just and defensive war against Russian invader. Both are equally important for our own security, since our collective support to Ukraine to win this war lends necessary credibility to our own deterrence efforts. And here we have to work to do. On both accounts, every ally, big or small, must lead in. Canada was a big part of creation of NATO 75 years ago. Canada was the first to ratify our accession to NATO. And as it was mentioned already this morning, in the past 7 years, Canada, through its true presence in Latvia, is a big part of why Latvia feels secure. We joined NATO for search to strengthen NATO, a search of security. Now we want to strengthen NATO to be able to continuously enjoy benefits of security. So we hope that it will never be required to invoke Article 5 again. As Canadian Secretary of State for External Affairs, Mr. Pearson said at the signing ceremony 75 years ago, the treaty is not a pact for war, but a pledge for peace and progress. We in Latvia are committed to keep that pledge, and we want to do it together with our allies over Atlantic. Political signal to Russia and to citizens of host countries that NATO collectively is acting when there is a war of aggression and redrawing borders right next to NATO's borders. Visible presence that signals commitment. Latvians are particularly assured that there are 11 nations represented in the Count's Forward Presence Brigade, or battalion at the moment, which will be brigade in the future, which is truly multinational commitment to defense of their land. That is very reassuring. Canada's presence in already for almost 7 years in Latvia with the troop rotations every 6. Canada, of course, is present in already Latvia for almost 7 years with a troop rotation every 6 months. That means that around 6,000 Canadian troops have been through training and exercises in Latvia. They know local environment and people, they know terrain to operate, they know Latvia's defense forces, and they know other nations of multinational force. And we, of course, know Canadians as well. I mean, in conclusion, before we start discussion, I would like also to recognize that really huge change for security of the Baltic Sea region is accession of Sweden and Finland in NATO. Their membership means a lot of military strength, clarity, and defense plans, better resupply of forward deployed forces. This is really big deterrent effect as well. So I will conclude with this one, and I'm ready to engage in discussion as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Saga. That's a great way to start us off. I want to give an opportunity to Major General Smith to talk to us a little bit about how this looks from an operational standpoint before we open it up to discussion, because it strikes me, especially as you were talking about the fact that you're about to hold field exercises in November of this year, and what that means, that there have to be some special challenges to molding together a group of coming from 11 nations. Can you talk to us a little bit about how some of the challenges that you see and you face and how you've overcome those?
Yeah, thanks, Robin, and thanks to the Wilson Center for your thought leadership on this. Really appreciate you highlighting what Latvia and Canada are doing together. If I could first of all kind of zoom out a bit bigger and just go back to my time as the Assistant Chief of Staff, G5, in Supreme Headquarters Allied Powers Europe, when we were increasingly trying to make sure that we had strategic plans that aligned to the threats that existed. And if we can think back to 2014, increasingly NATO started focusing to the east. This was a return to threat. What are we going to do about it? And so they stood up a series of graduated response plans that were facing to the east towards Russia. Obviously, that took an even stronger tone post February 2022 with a further invasion of Ukraine, as increasingly NATO focused on a very aggressive Russia. And so what we are doing in the Baltic is part of a bigger perspective of NATO's transition to something it knew in the past. Obviously, before the Cold War ended, this is the kind of thing that we remember doing there. Well, it's farther to the east now, but it is unfortunately, history's not repeating itself, but rhyming a bit. So we are now present in Latvia with our wonderful Latvian hosts, but that is equally part of the broader Baltic perspective. Obviously, Estonia has Great Britain there as a framework nation. We see in Lithuania with the Germans, and for that matter, the United States of America is in Poland. This is all part of that eastern-facing protection and deterrence that we're trying to achieve. Specifically within Latvia, and again, I'd like to highlight our great Latvian hosts. They have continued to support the very large number of Canadians that have rotated through there. And indeed, the small camp, when I first visited Adaji in 2017, small little camp, now a rather big one, continues to be challenged for the sheer capacity of 10 plus nations that are hosted there, which is, as Scott alluded to, why we're seeing, looking for other bases. Don't want to make it sound like they're all just sitting on the base all the time, but at the same time, that's where they're hosted and continue to progress. How can we achieve the deterrence that we need to, so that when Russia looks to its west, it realizes it's just a really bad idea to be aggressive in any way. But if I can zoom in specifically to how does that work? I think it's an interesting challenge. The Canadian style of leadership, perhaps, the collaborative effect of looking across 10 plus nations and just huddling together and saying, listen, we've never done this before either. Let's all figure this out together. And slowly build a battle group. And if you allow me some NATO vocabulary, what was called an enhanced forward presence battle group is now evolving to a forward land force brigade. And as Scott alluded to, in about a week, we'll be standing up that brigade headquarters and calling it at initial stages of being prepared to have a brigade headquarters, leading the presence there as we continue to bring more capability and work with those different nations that I'm very proud to say have continued to stay there with us. Other countries, Spain, Italy, have stood up their own forward land force brigades. We quite rightly said, okay, you're going to be more busy. You're going to need to go elsewhere and focus on that. But many of them, including Poland, have said, nope, we're learning. We become better trained by focusing there. And I think we all learned from the idea of 10 and soon with Denmark and Sweden, excuse me, also being present in Latvia. They're learning more and more as well as how to work together as an alliance, a thing we hadn't done to this same extent as a while. So first of all, I'd just like to really focus on Latvia being great hosts. We couldn't do what we do there without them supporting what we do, welcoming Canadians and their families and a number of other nations, and then all those different nations from across the alliance that have continued to learn with us and provide the deterrence that we need to.
Thanks very much. I think that really is a good deep dive into that. And, you know, when you're talking about the approach to decision making and figuring this out, it strikes me that that also illustrates even NATO's own decision making process, trying to come to consensus. What is the best way forward? How can you most effectively bring your capabilities to bear on the problem set that you're facing, right? So that seems to me a good illustration of NATO in action, right? Not just in theory, but on the ground. I'm going to come to the kind of political decision that led to this and ask you, how difficult was it to get agreement to move forward on this? You have been engaged there in principle since 2014, but then in reality after the Madrid summit, really directing those forces onto the ground. What has it been difficult to persuade Canadians to invest in this effort and to continue their investment in this effort and to persuade them that there is a reason to care about this? Has that built over time? And then I'm going to come to you after, I'm going to give you a moment to think about that and warn Ambassador Selga that I'll then ask him whether there was any question in the minds of Latvians about hosting these troops there. So first to you.
Yeah. Oh,
both.
first me? Okay.
Wants to take it. I gave you the choice.
I can kick it off, and this will be a bit. We'll work out our hand signals or something like that. But look, militaries around the world that we have worked with know that when Canada says it's going to do something, we do it. And Canadians, the population here is very much in the realm of when Canada gives its word to do something or makes a commitment, that we follow through on that. And so I would say from a domestic political standpoint and just elected official standpoint, it's just a given that if we've already moved into support, recognizing as I've walked through already that NATO is a key part of our own security, and that integrated deterrence that we do with allies, which will, as Greg said, convince Russia it's a really bad idea to be aggressive. That's something that's a given. And so I would say that absolutely there is embraced that we continue that presence in Latvia and that increase. Our defense policy update, our North Strong and Free, which was released earlier this year, lays out quite clearly that Eastern Europe is an area, in addition to obviously to the Arctic. I can talk more about that if that's desired, and the Indo-Pacific. But as I laid out, our investments, particularly in Latvia, is a key part of that contribution, as well as a number of other capabilities in our North Strong and Free that will support not only what we do in Europe but in other areas. So all this to say, not difficult. Canadians expect that we move forward on meeting the commitments that we have made, and always NATO has been a key part of the Canadian psyche about what security is about and how it gets ensured.
Yeah, Robin, if I can just further emphasize the points that Scott made there is, so my generation of more mature soldiers, spent a lot of time in Afghanistan. The Canadian people in the end were very supportive of that mission. Having recently visited a base in which there's lots of soldiers walking around with medals from their time in Latvia, multiple tours now in Latvia, I think the Canadian people support them as well. And not to get all academic and talk about strategic culture and us North Americans being far away from the fire that's increasingly burning, Canadian people, I think, increasingly understand the threat we're seeing there. And I think that can be illustrated by last summer, in just prior to the Vilnius summit, our prime minister stood in Adagi and committed to $2.6 billion of capability, infrastructure, and the continued presence, and indeed the enlarged presence that I just expressed in Latvia. So I think we've doubled down and said, yep, we've got it. The days of the good old EFP, Enhanced Forward Presence Battle Group, we need to continue to expand beyond that to this forward land forces presence and do it with our great Latvian hosts and a lot of different countries. And so I think we remain very committed to that for the time being.
And sorry, and this is going to be the problem of sitting beside each other, so we'll rip off of each other here. But I will just add that obviously with the invasion of Ukraine, I mean, as already alluded to, I mean, there's the idiocy of that decision for all sorts of different reasons on the Russian part, but the unintended consequence for them is that stealing of the NATO resolve and the support of various populations of the countries that support the eastern flank of NATO. Feel that this is an existential threat, and that very much, as goes Ukraine, so go other areas where potential conflict could occur. So I would say that already there was that history of strong support for NATO, but the Ukrainian invasion is something that really doubled that resolve and intent.
Okay, Ambassador Selga, if I can turn to you for a moment. I know it's never easy, even when it is something that is designed to bring capabilities to your country. It's never easy to work out the logistics of hosting soldiers, building bases, all of these things. Can you talk to us a little bit about this? Was this something that was a relatively easy decision to take? Has there been any difficulty? I know that you talked a lot in the past about the role that your country plays within the structure of NATO. Is there something more that you would like to see in this area?
Well, I can only agree with my Canadian colleagues who, I mean, said if Russia would behave a little bit differently, I think probably we would see some of Canadian soldiers on Latvian soil, but probably not so many. So, but I mean, to host Canadians and those other nations of NATO, of course, in Latvia, that's an honor, privilege, and in this case, it's also a duty for us in Latvia. I think and as it was mentioned before, I mean, you know, beginning probably was not as easy as it seems now. So we are doing everything in order, I mean, to be very good hosts, I mean, to make a life of our colleagues from different nations very comfortable in Latvia. And as it was mentioned, so we are building at the moment the largest training facilities in Baltics, the new one, so that which will probably will have will give a better chance also for our friends. I mean, I just probably have to say that it's also very important politically, I mean, that we have a NATO flag with the NATO troops in Latvia, and those, you know, across the border to the east can see that flag is flowing, so that it's not just, you know, on a paper, that there is a symbol. And especially, I mean, to have Canadians which are not from, let's say, Germany, Poland, or maybe Portugal or Spain only, so, but Canadians who has come over the Atlantic Ocean. I think that shows that NATO takes defense and deterrence very seriously. It also helps, I mean, for us, I mean, in Latvia, you know, to show, well, it's, you know, to show the need for us to do also our homework. You know very well that Latvia is spending over 3% of GDP for defense. I'm not speaking about now our help to Ukraine. So we are all doing what we can at the moment. So that the only thing which I probably will mention regarding Ukraine is that government and parliament has decided that next 3-4 years we will spend 0.25% of GDP just for a military assistance to Ukraine. So that's will be in the law. And I think that it's of course unfortunately, but Russia's aggression in Ukraine helps. I mean, for our society to understand that we have to sacrifice probably many other things which we could do using this money which we are spending for defense, but situation regarding security is as it is. So that from that perspective, of course, those 11 nations, 10 plus nations who are helping us to defend the eastern border of NATO, is presence of those nations is very helpful.
Thank you. You raised the issue of capabilities and the defense spending on those capabilities. So I'm going to just go into that for a minute, because of course last week during his visits to Washington, the Secretary General and NATO issued their latest assessment of defense spending. And of course, we know also that countries are targeting some of their acquisition of capabilities to NATO's own goals and its own defense planning process. But I thought that I would ask our colleagues in Canada a little bit about their trajectory on defense spending and how they see that. In addition, because of course, these are capabilities that are also utilized for operations in Latvia. So if I can give that question to you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And and I'd be happy to talk about from the trajectory perspective. Certainly that trajectory ends with the commitment for Canada to meet the 2%. But if I can dial back a little bit and talk about a few things. One is that our defense budget has been the 7th largest of NATO partners until quite recently. Our defense budget has increased by 70% since 2017. In 2022, we announced $40 billion for NORAD modernization infrastructure, because certainly what we do in a continental defense, from a continental defense perspective, and in particular the Arctic, is something that helps to protect NATO's back door, as well as security of the Indo-Pacific region, and and with what we're seeing with Russia's worrying presence in the north, that is something that helps all of our collective security. Then over the past year and a bit, we've announced $40 billion in major procurements, from F-35s to remote piloted aircraft systems, the P-8A Poseidon multi-tanker aircraft. I could go on. And then we have our North Strong and Free that was released this year with $8 billion investments over 5 and 73 over 20. And with listing specific investments around that in terms of Northern Operational Support Hubs, tactical helicopters, long-range precision strike, and other pieces that I can get into should people want me to do a deeper dive. And so these are our major investments, major procurements, showing a trajectory that indeed is one about continuing to bring capabilities to bear to protect Canada and to work with our partners around in terms of promoting integrated deterrence. We mentioned the $2 billion plus in terms of infrastructure spending, or spending towards the full operational capability of Op Reassurance in Latvia. That involves tanks, that involves ammunition, helicopters, weapons, and all that supported by our joint roadmap with Latvia. So yes, then absolutely the 2% commitment. In our North Strong and Free, in the defense policy update, it lists a number of areas of other procurements that we would be looking to explore for procurement. Submarines, that's no small item, and there are many others. And that's right now with all this brings us, actually, we're on track to exceed the 20% target for major acquisitions as set by NATO. And so, and we're advising, obviously, the government in terms of, again, those things that can be explored to meet the 2%. So our percentage of GDP, the continuing hot economy that we have always makes that interesting formulation and calculation, but it has been trending up to 1.76% of GDP, and we expect that. Not only do we expect that, we're working through options to increase that to meet Canada's commitment.
You surely don't want us to wish on you a less hot economy.
No, this is it. This is the challenge, but.
So if I can, I'd like to put a question also to Ambassador Selga, and then I should warn y'all that we have already a very vibrant series of questions that are coming in for all of you. So I'm going to ask Ambassador Selga about a threat that I think people sometimes are underestimating or not seeing as much, and that is the range of hybrid attacks that we've seen in the Baltic Sea, from GPS jamming to cyber attacks, critical undersea infrastructure, and so forth. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you see those hybrid attacks and what that means for your country's planning and looking at the security in that region?
Well, I think if you look regarding cyber attacks, I think that's nothing new, and I think all of our allies, far and closer, has experienced those. And I think if you are here in the United States, or at least next to United States, and you remember the colonial pipeline, a couple of years ago, which left the East Coast without the fuel, almost without the fuel. So I think that we are experiencing those hybrid attacks, or as probably we can call them, non-conventional attacks, so that it's not only Latvia, we have seen it in Poland, in other countries as well at the moment. And I think that the most important part is that allies are ready to discuss, how to tackle those issues together, so that it's not only one country, in this case Latvia, or our neighboring countries, or Poland, who is dealing with this issue, because we do understand that it comes, actually, the source is one and only, and that's in the East, so that the probably issue which we will have to be able to address all allies together. So I hope that sooner or later that will be on the table in Brussels, in the headquarters, and I know that, of course, colleagues are already tackling that issue at the moment. So, but it is worrying, of course, so that it's not as.
Thank you. So first, I'm going to say to everyone who's listening online, I'm opening it up, so you can send in your questions to us. Please do let us know what you're thinking about, where you'd like us to go, because this is your opportunity for our listeners and people who have tuned in here to ask questions that come to your mind in the course of this discussion. I will say that as I look at the questions that have come in already, many of them focus on more specifics about Canada's defense budget, plans that it has to increase it, and its commitments to the defense of Ukraine and providing military support and economic support to Ukraine. And there was even a specific question that looked at the transition from battle group to brigade, and whether that would have an overall impact on the size of Canada's NATO funding. So I'm turning the floor back to my Canadian colleagues to give us maybe a little bit deeper dive on that.
Maybe I'll kick off and then hand over to Greg. Are we counting everything that's possible to count as part of our percentage? What country is not doing that? So absolutely, all the investments that we were making. I'm really glad that the question came in on Ukraine, because of course that was while I was rhyming off the list there earlier. That's an important one for sure. We've now, as a nation, we've committed and provided over $13 billion of financial and military support to Ukraine since the invasion began. About 16 million pounds of military support has been provided. everything from armored vehicles to ammunition, and what have you. As well, we've trained over 40,000 Ukrainian soldiers. We've signed the security agreement recently with Ukraine that makes a number of commitments around further support and the way that we work together. A lot of conversations that we're having, and happy to get into this as well, around our own defense industrial bases and the degree to which we shore one another up. Number of coalitions that several that we've joined and support. In the drone space, we've provided 800 drones recently, or in that process with Ukraine, and they've already started making their way over there. We do ship them. We do not fly them over the Atlantic, if there's that question. But Greg, maybe I'll turn to you, because I know you've played quite a close role there, and particularly on the coalitions as well.
Yeah, Robin, so look, let me be a bit more qualitative than quantitative about Canada's contribution in NATO. Canada remains completely committed, of course, to NATO. We are the original 12 that signed on in 1949, and even before that, we've been involved in European security. I have a grandfather that was wounded in World War I in what's called the last 100 days as they pursued the Germans towards France and into Belgium. My wife has a great uncle buried in the Netherlands, killed towards the end of World War II. That's just one small piece of the entire bigger picture of Canada's contribution throughout the history of European security since the founding of Canada. World War I, losing 60,000 soldiers. World War II, a further 42,000. Having been involved in facing east against the Soviets throughout the Cold War with a brigade and other capabilities sitting in Europe, we, like everybody else, cashed in on the peace dividend in the early 90s, and are now also somewhat grumpily looking at having to return to Europe in force and bring more capability. And I think Scott rhymed off very well a lot of the different examples of us doing more there. Canada committed to the 2% number as early as the Wales Summit of 2014. We've doubled down that on many times. It's a long way to go. As Scott said, we actually have a very big economy, and that's a lot of money to add, and you have to make sure we can actually use it. Just dumping a lot of money into defense only to find out you can't spend it properly. It's an input, not an output. And we as Canadians want to make sure we're contributing to defense throughout NATO, but obviously particularly into Latvia right now. And so we have work to do. We've given advice to government, but we're really working hard on trying to do more as far as contributing to NATO security, both from a Latvian perspective and as well as deals with Ukraine.
Okay, thanks very much. Ambassador Saga, can I talk to you a little bit about Baltic air policing and the role that has played? Because that's also a NATO contribution in the area.
Well, I think that since we joined NATO, I think that was one of those, at that moment, I mean, in 2004, one of the most important issues which we were let's say, speaking with our allies within the NATO was that, that our airspace is not, let's say, not protected or not secure. So nobody is, let's say, looking, there are no overflights. I mean, there are no airplanes, NATO airplanes. I mean, so, and that the plan was drawn, I mean, so that every 6 months there is one of our allied forces, air forces actually is taking over our airspace, all three Baltics. So there is a base in Lithuania, and I think in Estonia. And now I think that because of some transformations in Estonia, so I think that we are dealing with that issue as well. So I think that has played, of course, a huge role, and of course I think it will play a role as well, because for us, and it was mentioned, I mean, regarding the financial possibilities of Canada, let's say, and Latvia, those are not compatible. Of course, we do, devote those 3%, but our budget is far more less than many other NATO countries. So that gives, and probably we will never buy F-16s or F-35s. So that not for our air forces. Never say never, but not at the moment. so that it gives us, security feeling as well. So I think that with Finland and Sweden joining NATO, I think that issue will be tackled also in secure. I mean, so that let's see how it will work out. But I think we can be only grateful to our NATO colleagues, I mean, for doing air policing in the Baltics.
We have also done some work here, as you said, on the what Sweden and Finland bring as contributors to security in the region and to NATO with their membership. And if people are interested, they can look for that on our website as well. So looking at some of the other questions, for our Canadian colleagues, I'd just like to note NATO's Center of Excellence in Montreal has been accredited recently, and this is focused on climate change and security. And we're interested in that here at the Wilson Center because we also have a program on environmental change and security issues. And so I thought I would give you a chance to talk about how that contributes to NATO's security efforts.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Robin, and happy to brag about the Climate Change and Security Center of Excellence. It's un-Canadian to do so, but I'll try. Yeah, so we have a climate change.
Try.
I do my best. Climate Change and Security Center of Excellence. I think they're up to 30 now centers of excellence in NATO. I've been lucky enough to visit a few. This one's sitting in Montreal, just outside of Dorval Airport. Currently has about 10 nations that have signed up, with actually a lot more interest, both within the alliance and outside. Canada has an Indo-Pacific strategy. We've been working a lot as a Pacific nation on linking better with some of our partners throughout the Pacific, and there's a lot of interest. As hopefully everybody knows, the military is often looked at to deal with the symptoms of climate change. We're a big workforce that can help out in fires, floods, etc. And indeed, Canada, the Canadian military was deployed for something like 130 days last summer fighting fires. So far, so good this year, but we'll see how it goes. Floods, etc. It tends to be the militaries that are a large available workforce that can do something about that. Now, that also corrodes readiness. The idea that you need to be ready to shoot, move, communicate. If you're busy fighting fires, that's not quite the same thing. So it's something that a lot of our nations share. But equally is the idea that we actually cause a lot of the problems of climate change now. A lot. We have big green military vehicles, ships, airplanes. They help contribute to the types of gases, etc., the pollution that cause climate change. So I think there's a number of areas here where we can share lessons learned. How is everybody trying to do a better job at not polluting? How have you learned how to work with a large number of different agencies in your own governments to deal with the effects of climate change? I find NATO votes with its feet. If they think it's a valuable center of excellence, countries show up, and if it's not, well, not as many do. Very proud to say there are 10 countries currently there, a lot more interest, and we're looking forward to emphasizing what we're doing there and continue to work with great partners and allies to share the knowledge of what we learned about it.
I think it's been very interesting to see how NATO has taken on this challenge as part of its role and to try to incorporate that into its strategy and its planning and so forth. And this is actually what NATO does so phenomenally well, is to try and look at future challenges as well as current challenges and plan for them. So we'll be paying attention to what the Center of Excellence is doing and see what we can learn from that. You mentioned defense industrial policy, which I think is a challenge that all of the NATO allies are facing, because the readiness issue is actually what has brought that to us. As we have responded to the needs that Ukraine faces, we look at the readiness of our capabilities and so forth, but also our ability to produce what is necessary for the fight. Can you talk to us a little bit about what Canada is doing in that regard?
Sure, absolutely. Actually, in the defense policy update in our North Strong and Free, there's a section around supply chain in terms of us developing a defense supply chain strategy, and a reference to procurement reform, which is an always exciting conversation, something I never thought I would be interested in, but frankly, I'm massively interested in, as we all are, because we're all in this world right now. All nations have been moving forward on developing defense industrial strategies, on looking at how they procure things. Urgency is definitely the #1 priority for everyone, and the fast fielding of new capabilities, let alone the capabilities upon which we've traditionally relied, is important there. That was something that Canada was already moving out on in terms of a review of that, even before the release of the policy update. Lots of work going on there, and great work actually with allied partners, where myself and colleagues have been having a lot of great conversations. Look, this is something I've been holding back on using a very Canadian analogy, but I might kind of just do it, and some might groan because I've used it before. But I grew up romping around the mountains of BC in bear country, and there are grizzly bears, and you do not want to be standing alone in a field with a gun facing a grizzly bear, because usually you won't hit the thing and you're going to get hurt. What you want to be doing is standing with a whole bunch of other people that are not dispersed but are very close together, and everyone facing forward. And integrated deterrence is everything about confusing decision making of our adversaries. And to confuse that decision making, it's not only to be present, but it's indeed to have the various capabilities to bear, so that collectively we are causing that deterrence. It's been astounding and surprising the degree to which Russia has been able to not only maintain a resilient economy, but to grow their own industrial base. Certainly they are backstopped by other countries, unfortunately, and very concerningly in that regard. And so the conversations that we have been having with NATO partners is that element of allied shoring. What can we each bring to bear that helps the fight? And those things that we do together. So when I mentioned a number of those big platform purchases that we're doing, they are purchases that our allies are doing. And so that allows us to move out together, and to look at ways to which we can all build components that support one another's platforms. How we actually look at, you mentioned hybrid space, there's a lot of dual use startups. Most of our economy, defense industrial base, we have 650 defense companies. 90% of them are small, medium-sized enterprises doing incredible work along in all areas of advanced capabilities. And those are elements where you're trying to identify them, secure them, because if they're not secured from aggressive foreign investment, from adversaries, or from a leakage from cyber attacks, that won't mean anything. And to bring that forward to our allies, and to talk about the degree to which what we might export to one another to maintain our own resilient defense industrial base, but also what we might jointly procure together, looking at joint requirements. So I would say everything that we're doing domestically to fast field the procurement or the acquisitions that we need for our own individual security is something that's lending itself and supporting the collective conversations that we're all having. So we'll be looking at, obviously, our own rule sets around procurement. We are absolutely looking at the strategic kind of relationships we need to have with industry. Everyone's looking at that. We can't just talk to one another through RFPs and contracts, but we actually need to really sit down and have real conversations about what's available domestically and to promote outside. We're looking at things like minimum viable products, not building these really exquisite things that are only useful to one nation and that delay the process. And an industrial strategy, as our minister has come out on, is a key part of what will make Canada's defense industry successful. Having the multi-year investments that we move forward on are a key part of that. In that we have an Arno strong and free, and there will be more that we will do that will help the collective fight as well.
That is so interesting, and I think we could probably actually do an even deeper dive for another half an hour or so.
Yeah, I know I really held back there, but
oh yeah, I know, I could see you were, and yet I'm actually fascinated by this, because I think procurement is one of the big challenges that NATO is facing in the coming years, and these and also securing supply chains and so forth. So you've given me many ideas for maybe a future discussion on this, but I'm afraid I'm going to actually have to wrap this up. So with that, I'd like to thank our three guests. Thank you very much indeed for being part of this discussion. And I promised you something vibrant, and I think that is what we got. So with that, I'd like to thank also our audience for their fantastic questions, because I have riffed off of those for the last several minutes. And thank you to the Canada Institute as well for putting this all together. So with that, it's a wrap. Thank you very much indeed, and to our audience for joining us.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.